Emily, go ahead, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Gary. I'm going to go ahead and just turn my video off during the presentation for the sake of bandwidth and kind of troubleshooting. And then during our question session at the end, I'll turn my video back on so we can all see each other and discuss. All right, so as I said in the intros, I am the Beneficial Use Reconnaissance Program Coordinator for the Boise Regional Office, which is a program with the loving acronym of BURP. And so today we're going to be talking about some sites that we are hoping to visit in the 2022 field sampling season, which will start in mid-June and probably commence in mid to late September. Okay, so to get started, the most popular question, what exactly is BURP? And I kind of explained what that acronym means, and this is essentially our flagship monitoring program that helps us meet requirements of the Federal Clean Water Act. So we need to assess the streams of Idaho for their beneficial uses. Beneficial uses are cold water aquatic life support, salmonid spawning support, primary and secondary recreation. So those are water bodies where ingestion of water could be likely by people who are recreating, swimming, or fishing. And then we've got a few other uses such as drinking water systems and wildlife habitat. So what we're doing is we're going out and we're applying this standardized procedure statewide. We bring on temporary technicians every summer, and they go out in groups of 3. And what they're doing is they're collecting aquatic insects, conducting fish surveys, collecting some basic water chemistry components, temperature, conductivity, dissolved oxygen, and pH. And then they're also taking some qualitative and quantitative habitat assessments. So those are going to include things like pool variability, bank stability, and overall looking for indicators of good fish habitat. So how is our BURP data used? Our BURP data that we take, the aquatic macroinvertebrates, the fish, and all of that habitat information is kind of used as an integrated snapshot of the stream. So if we were just going to take a grab sample of the water and kind of assess the water chemistry, we would just be seeing that moment in time. So the idea here is that looking at the macroinvertebrate community and the fish community is going to give you an idea of the overall conditions through time in that stream. So our scores are based on these 3 main categories. We've got our macroinvertebrate index, the fish index, and that habitat index. So for macroinvertebrates, it's kind of a complex weighted system, but what we're looking at is specific species that are known to be cold water obligates. They absolutely need cold water to thrive. That would be a good indication that a stream might be supporting cold water aquatic life. Or other things would be certain species that are known to be kind of sediment intolerant. That would give you a good idea of maybe if there's a sedimentation problem in your stream, if you no longer have any of those species, but you used to find them in those reaches. So these scores are compared to streams that are considered to be in reference condition. So reference streams have a few different criteria. Essentially, we're looking for streams that we don't believe to be disturbed by anthropogenic use. And all across Idaho, we've got a few of these different reference condition streams that are in different ecoregions. So streams are scored slightly differently based on their ecoregion because they're being compared to different reference condition streams. So those regions that we broadly classify are kind of a plains and valleys classification, a foothills classification, and a mountains classification. So overall, this BURP data is part of our ambient monitoring program. And we also have some other monitoring in support of the state office, as well as bacteria surveillance for E. coli, which can be a simple grab sample, or a geomean, which is 5 samples collected across a designated period of time. So all of this data is our internal data, and that kind of goes into our assessments And our assessments inform the overall stream condition that we put forth in our every 2-year, ideally, integrated report. So from these assessments, we kind of pick up a signal of impairment, ideally, if our burp score fails. And then from there, we can kind of hone in on streams that are at risk or impaired. And then we do follow-up studies with our TMDL writers, or maybe go and start investigating what the actual cause of that low burp score is. From there, TMDL writers put together TMDL reports for these impaired streams, and that stands for our total maximum daily load. So you can kind of think of that as a water body health plan. We're kind of trying to make sure that we are meeting targets for different potential pollutants that could be affecting that stream. And then in a lot of cases, we want to reduce the level of pollutants to a certain level that we establish in that TMDL. So I've mentioned the integrated report a few times, and to give you an overview here, the integrated report is our comprehensive analysis of Idaho's surface waters. It satisfies sections 305B and 303D of the Clean Water Act. The assessments are based on data between January 1st, 2016 and December 31st of 2020 for our most recent cycle. So that's the cycle that just happened, and we are currently going to put that report out. And I'll kind of give you an update on those dates here next. So overall, the integrated report is a decision-making tool for groups, internal and external to DEQ. And it puts out that list of those 303D waters, those impaired waters that we need to focus on creating a TMDL for. All right, so the integrated report format, all state waters are placed into at least one of 5 reporting categories. And this is based on the amount of information that we have about their water quality, whether or not their beneficial uses are supported, and the type of impairment that is impairing those beneficial uses. So for this, we use a categorization of categories 1 through 5. So categories 1 and 2, category 1 is waters presumed to be fully supporting all BUs. And category 2 is waters fully supporting some beneficial uses, but the support status of the remaining beneficial uses has not been determined, or data collected has been deemed insufficient to inform. Waters that are in category 3 have insufficient information or no data at all to determine beneficial use support. And that differs from category 2, because in category 2, maybe we have been able to inform a few of those beneficial uses, whereas category 3 would be nothing known. So for category 4 and 5, category 4 is waters that do not support one or more beneficial uses, but they do not require the development of a TMDL. And what I don't have here is kind of a description of the subcategories within 4, but a really common example here would be that they don't require the development of a TMDL because the TMDL has already been written. So that would be in category 4. Category 5 is waters that do not support one or more beneficial uses, and the TMDL is currently required. So these are our impaired streams on that 303D list. All right, and then the timeline for the cycle that I just mentioned that was looking at data collected between 2016 and 2020 is as follows. The Watershed Advisory Group consultations already happened last fall. The EPA informal review has been undertaken. The public comment period opened and closed. And so right now we are responding to comments, making revisions if needed, and then kind of to be determined the date when we submit to EPA. So I've linked a copy of the draft integrated report in this PowerPoint, and I'll make sure to share this PowerPoint afterwards if anyone wants to kind of explore and look around. So jumping to the Little Salmon River subbasin, we've got it here outlined in purple. So this is one of our subbasin units, and you can see that it's kind of flanked by a few others, denoted by that green text. So Hell's Canyon, Lower Salmon, North Fork, Payette, and Weiser. And with the Little Salmon, it's kind of an interesting subbasin in our region, because as you can see, the subbasin itself is actually split into 2 deed regions, right along the Idaho-Adams County lines. So the north portion is under the Lewiston office overall jurisdiction, and the south portion is under the Boise regional office jurisdiction. So for the sake of working with this collaborative, I think I'm gonna kind of be your monitoring point person. And my counterpart in Lewiston, her name is Sarah Anzalone. So if anyone needs her contact info at any point, feel free to reach out to me and I can make that happen. But for this summer, it'll be the Boise regional office that's going to kind of handle potential sites in this subbasin. Okay, there we go. All right, so now I'm going to go through the sites that we're really hoping to visit. And the goal here is you can kind of get an idea of which areas the burp crew is going to be in. And then on a few of these, I might have some access issues. So if anyone sees an opportunity for a collaboration, or you might know one of the property owners, or maybe you even are one of the property owners, we can kind of talk to each other afterwards and see if we can figure something out to make our sampling schedule happen. So the first stream that we're hoping to visit is the west branch of Goose Creek. And I've got that assessment unit highlighted here on this map in that blue color. So a little bit later, I'm going to show you our integrated report mapping tool. And when you're looking for streams on our integrated report mapping tool and you want to see all the past burp sampling information collected on those streams, the most important thing is going to be this assessment unit ID. And so I've got that in the table on the far left there. So that's a good example of what an assessment unit ID looks like. It contains the subbasin code and then a specific assessment unit code that kind of denotes this reach. And these AUs, as we call them, are usually divided up based on stream order. So a lot of times, first and second order streams will all be grouped together, then the third order sections, the fourth order sections, and so on. And this is the typical case, but every now and then we do split out a new AU, and that might be based on overall land use management in that area. We may have determined that there's pretty striking differences that don't necessarily fit cleanly into those categories of stream order. So for West Branch, Goose Creek, looking at this map, those of you who are familiar with the area probably are realizing that a lot of this is on private land. So my hope for this stream is that we're going to access it via Packer John State Cabin Park, which is seen in the bottom right-hand corner of this map. And then just a few bits of information. This stream is currently not supporting. So it would be really good to go and get a follow-up sample. It was last sampled in 2004. We have a goal of returning to assess streams kind of every 5 to 8 years. So this stream is obviously overdue, as you'll see with a few streams in this subbasin. And one of the reasons for that is it probably previously sampled on private land, and then in the years following, we were not able to regain access to a sampleable portion of this stream. So the current beneficial use status, this stream is in category 4C for flow regime modification. So that is for assessment units where there might be a lot of diversions, small dams, and anything that might have impacted or drastically changed what would have been a natural flow. So moving on to our next stream, we've got Mud Creek. So Mud Creek appears on the map. You've got 95 there kind of for reference. This is over in the northwest or kind of middle west section of the Little Salmon subbasin. So here I'm probably going to sample Mud Creek on Forest Service land. You can see a little cluster of past sites. They're kind of a green and black dot right on the middle of Mud Creek here. And we can see the date of the last year sampled, which was 2008. So again, a stream that I think is a little past due, and we'd like to go and kind of follow up. Last time we visited, this stream was fully supporting. It got overall very good burp scores. On the far right here, I've included the overall macroinvertebrate index score, which is a 3. So these scores range from 0 to 3, so a 3 is the highest that we would see. Fish score for Mud Creek is not available. It was not fished due to the presence of threatened or endangered species at the reach. And then for the habitat score, it received a 2. So a 2 is kind of middle of the road score, but it's still overall a good score. And this contributed to this site having a good passing score, and we'd like to see if it's in the same condition. All right, so we'd also like to visit the Brundage Reservoir tributary. This was last sampled in 2006. So another kind of past due site. Its last burp scores for all indexes were as high as you can really get, so a 3 in every category. So that means that we had cold water fish, probably little to no invasive fish species, good macroinvertebrate community that's both diverse, taxa rich, and probably not many species that you would consider pollutant tolerant. And then habitat index also very high. And I went through and looked at this one, and we had kind of good cover, really good fish habitat, deep varied pools, shade and stable banks, and then little to no kind of anthropogenic influence on the sampled reach. And then this one is in category 2 for cold water aquatic life, salmonid spawning, and secondary contact recreation. So this means that these beneficial uses were assessed and they're looking good, but there may be some other beneficial uses that still require assessment, hence the category 2. All right, so our next assessment unit I'd like to visit is the first and second order streams of Goose Creek. So these feed into Goose Creek Reservoir. Again, they're highlighted here in blue. Last year sampled 2006. And the last burp score that it received, very high scores for the macroinvertebrate index and the habitat index, but it failed its fish score. So a failing fish score in this case was brought about by the crew catching a single brook trout. So even though brook trout are a cold water trout species, as an invasive species, they kind of tank this index, especially if it's the only thing you get in the stream. Since trout are a cold water species, I wouldn't necessarily want to kind of fail or flunk this site and list it as impaired just because an invasive species has sort of colonized this reach. So this one is awaiting a rescore in which we'll go in and we'll reassess and kind of take a closer look at that fish community, probably extend a little bit more effort in our electrofishing. And if it turns out that brook trout are all that's here, that still probably isn't a reason to list this stream as impaired if, as we can see from the macroinvertebrate and habitat index, it's pretty high functioning for cold water aquatic life support. All right, next we've got 6 Mile Creek, entire drainage. And 6 Mile Creek was last sampled in 2004. It got really good burp scores overall, high macroinvertebrate and habitat index scores, and pretty good fish score as well. So this stream was fully supporting when last visited in category 2 for cold water aquatic life support and salmonid spawning. And this is one that we would like to revisit, essentially just to update our information. So this is outside that kind of 5 to 8 or 10 year period. Up next is the Hazard Creek tributaries. So when we've got a lot of first and second order streams included in an assessment unit, it can look a little haphazard like this. But what this means is that any of these streams that are denoted here with the blue line, if they are in fact perennial, I could sample any one of them, and then that score would apply to this entire assessment unit. So Hazard Creek tributaries last visited in 2006, so it's been a while. They got high macroinvertebrate and habitat index scores and then a lower fish score, but this site still passed burp scoring and was listed as fully supporting. So we'd like to go and again, just kind of check up on this assessment unit and update our information that we've got for internal data. All right, next is Hard Creek. So Hard Creek, last sampled 2008. Pretty much same story as you see with a lot of these kind of mountain streams in the Salmon River subbasin. So high macroinvertebrate score, high habitat index score, and then fish score. This one was not sampled, and I don't believe this one has been sampled in the past for fish. And that is because every time crews have been to it, they believe they saw spawning salmonids, in which case we generally do not shock or disturb the stream for our fishery survey. So as of right now, Hard Creek listed as fully supporting and in category 2 for cold water aquatic life, salmon spawning, and secondary contact recreation. All right, so this is one that we would love some help or some input on. These are the Little Salmon River Meadow Valley tributaries. So again, this assessment unit contains a lot of first and second order streams that have all been grouped together. So in the map on the left, you can see those different stream segments that are included in the assessment unit. And you can see a lot of these fall within kind of that flat valley bottom. So a lot of that is going to be private. I would really like to sample this stream down in the valley. So I've pulled up using Onyx, which is an application that kind of shows you the private property boundaries and layers on the right here. Sorry for the resolution of this PDF. I will include a better one that I'll follow up with the Little Salmon River Watershed collaborative so that you guys have a better map to refer to. But there's a piece of property here that I would really like to access. Let's see if we can, oops. Not read that name though, if anyone else can. Let me know, otherwise I'll follow up with that name and we can see if we can figure out access in the valley. I do have the option to sample the stream on Forest Service land, so you can kind of see some headwaters of 4 Mile Creek in the map on the left that cross over into this green section. So if needed, I can sample over there. As of right now, this stream is considered unassessed. Every time someone has gone to sample it, they have either tried to access a portion of the stream that was not perennial and so was designated no flow. That's what happened when a crew last went in 2007. And then a few of those sections that you can kind of see those headwaters are in some pretty steep country, and I think it's a little harder to access. All right, so that wraps up the streams that I've got on my list for the subbasin. And I was going to do an overview of our integrated report mapping tool so that everyone can kind of have their fingertips and be able to navigate through past data. But really quickly, before I do that, did anyone have questions about any of those streams? I think we'll also have a moment for questions at the end.
Yeah, Emily, this is Wes. I was going to ask you, do you happen to know on that 4 Mile Creek using Onyx or one of those programs, who the property owner is. And I think there's a lot of folks in here that would know who, if you knew the name of the property, they could maybe put you in touch with them or gauge if they'd be willing to let you or things like that.
Yeah, and I do have the name. Sorry about that. I had converted it to a PDF and put it into the presentation. Hadn't realized how blurry it was. So a few of the property owners, I've got the names now. I've got the, so we've got Rolly Armacost and Armacost Investments. And then one property owner where we might be able to walk across part of the property, but we would need additional access to sample a full reach length, is Kelly Thomas and Karen J.
Yeah, Tom and
Karen Kelly.
And then the other one was Deborah Campbell Trust.
Yeah.
they're just all on the
Cemetery.
or-
Circle C,
Yeah,
well, cemetery, whatever.
Yeah.
Campbell Lane.
Campbell Lane,
Yeah.
just below the- yeah. In between the old Circle C Ranch and Harold Campbell's place.
Okay.
Mhm,
Do you know these folks, Linnea? Would you be able to reach out to them?
mhm.
Linnea, who's on our steering committee, has said she could reach out, Emily, and maybe you could be in touch with Linnea, and she could just, I don't know, if they're next water meeting or whatever you see folks, maybe get back to you on that.
Yeah, that would be great. And I'll share my email in the chat here before I finish. And then I'll also make this PowerPoint in that PDF with easier to read names that correspond to those properties. I'll make that all available. So yeah, just be in touch with me if possible, and we'll see if we can work something out. Before I'm done real quick, I do want to show you guys the integrated report mapping tool. All right, so right now you should be looking at the 2018-2020 integrated report mapping tool. Once the most recent rendition of the report is released, this will be updated with all the sites and kind of information that has been integrated from those last 40 years. So with the integrated report mapping tool, we're just going to start over here on the left side. We've got a few different ways to search subbasins. And I know that in this case, I want to look at the Little Salmon. So we're zooming into the Little Salmon. And once you get to a certain kind of zoomed in resolution, you're going to start seeing all the past burp sampling sites that we've done show up with this green and black icon. So one thing that you can do is you can click a specific kind of sampling incident, and then down here we can go to data. So right now we're looking at all the data that was collected in 2007 at this site on Hazard Creek. So from here, sometimes you can go through a gallery. Looks like this site did not have any pictures associated. Oh, I picked a bad one, okay. So it looks like they didn't fish this site. But if you wanted to, you could go through the macroinvertebrates. So we've got macroinvertebrates identified to genus or species. You can go through some of the habitat measurements that crew made. It always takes a minute to load here. There we go. So you can look through the different habitat measurements that were taken. So that's one nice way to use the mapper. Another thing that you can do is if you kind of know a general stream, but you don't need to look at just a site, you want to know how that entire assessment unit's doing, you can click on any section of stream, and then you can go in and select status. And this will tell you the current overall status. So on the far right here, that's going to tell you what category the stream is in, the integrated report. And that'll also give you an idea of all the past burp sites that have happened anywhere on that assessment unit, the exact location of the site, and then the different macroinvertebrate fish and habitat index scores. So that's another way to look at it. And then if you have an assessment unit ID, once you've selected your subbasin, you could also scroll through down here and select your assessment unit. Say, I want this one. And it will go through and highlight every stream segment included in that assessment unit for you on the map. So this is just kind of a good way to get familiar with some data, to be able to do some exploration. If anyone kind of desires to get in here and dig around a little. And then I'll be available by email if any questions come up about things that you find on the integrated report and mapper. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here, and then I've got a few minutes for questions as long as we haven't gone too far over.
Yeah, this is Wes. I have a couple of questions if you don't mind. I was curious, I didn't realize, I thought the burp had a water sampling component of it. And so I guess that's separate, you know, so it looks like you score the sites based on macroinvertebrates, fish, and habitat. So when you get a TMDL based on temperature, is that purely based on the macroinvertebrates and fish and habitat at the sites, or is there does the water quality sampling also feed into the TMDL listing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the BERT program is a rapid bioassessment that can kind of give us an overall signal of impairment, but it doesn't explicitly identify what is impairing the stream. So you don't have really, you know, a fine resolution answer just from those macroinvertebrates and fish. It can kind of help inform what you're thinking might be happening. But if we had a site fail its burp sample, then we would need to go in and kind of do follow-up monitoring to kind of really get to the root cause of why that bioassessment failed. So we wouldn't simply be looking at, you know, the fish and saying, okay, well, you know, maybe we've only got a catfish at this site and some minnows, some warm water minnows, it must be temperature. What would happen is it would fail burp. And then from there, we would go in and we'd kind of be looking and we would think, okay, it looks like we need to do some temperature monitoring. It looks like we need to do some sediment monitoring. And then we would move forward from there. Also, when you see some temperature impaired streams, we do accept external data in our integrated report call for data. So some of that is information that has been collected by the Forest Service or the USGS and has been submitted to us, clearly indicating a violation of temperature criteria, in which case then we might go straight to listing that stream as impaired for temperature.
Great, thank you. Do you guys have like long-term, you know, we've been kind of trying to find more data on stream temperatures, and we found some. Idaho Fish and Game had some, and BLM had some, and I was curious, do you guys have like permanent hobo temperature loggers in some of these sites?
We don't have any permanent kind of sondes deployed. We go in and maybe we put a sonde in if we had a question about a certain assessment unit and we wanted to do some follow-up monitoring, but we don't have temperature loggers essentially that are regularly distributed or systematically distributed. That's sort of a follow-up measure for us. And we do, for some of that temp data, really rely on external data that's high quality that we would consider tier 1 to kind of make some informed listing decisions.
Emily, this is Commissioner Purdy. I have a couple questions for you. You've only talked about fish as beneficial use. Both Brundage Reservoir and Goose Lake were built for agricultural use. Brundage is always clean and temperature is always cold, and there's trout in there. I'm not really sure you completely I don't know that there's any problems with that reservoir whatsoever, and it never completely empties out because Fish and Game has a lot of water in there. But you never mentioned anything about agriculture being a beneficial use at all. And with Goose Lake, it pretty much empties out because it's used for irrigation purposes. So are you trying to change that? Are you trying to eliminate agriculture without and water rights? Because you completely leave that out of this entire equation.
No, we wouldn't be eliminating anything. So the cold water aquatic life beneficial use is just one that people tend to be pretty familiar with, but I believe that kind of agricultural water use is also considered a beneficial use by DEQ. So being able to, provide water for agricultural use is under that same umbrella. And if it was meeting its use, that would also be seen as beneficial, the same way that a stream that we were hoping to maintain for salmon spawning, spawning salmonids would be seen as beneficial. So some of those reservoirs up there, we're not actually assessing the reservoir itself. So I was just kind of looking at some tributaries to those reservoirs. And I think I mentioned this, but one of them did receive a low fish score. And I was saying that I don't view that as a reason to give it, an impaired scoring, because it all seems to be in pretty high functioning order from our assessments.
So what you're saying is there really aren't any problems up there from that answer?
For the specific streams that I listed, when we last visited them, they were all fully supporting and things looked good. It has been more than 10 years since we were there and were able to collect data. So what I'm hoping to do is just go in and kind of get an update on that data and be able to have some more current information to look at. But I suspect that it's going to be in pretty good condition from those past scores.
Yeah, because there is factors that feed into that Goose Creek because of the bug kill and the drainage below there, which is probably exposed the stream banks more to sunlight than when the timber was in there.
Yeah. That creek's probably gonna change.
Well, that was in Goose Creek.
Oh.
That was below.
Yeah.
And that would be from a lack of management and getting the dead trees out every single year versus having to take them all out at once from a huge bug kill.
Sorry, I heard a few different voices there. Were you asking if we go in and do any kind of habitat restoration or something with large woody debris?
No, I'm just asking if you're taking that into account of the stream changing over the last 15 years.
Yeah, well, it has been a while since we collected some data in those streams. So I am hoping to go in and get updated information. And then if there has been kind of a change through time, that burp score will be one of our first indications of what's going on. I usually go out with the crews as well. So it's a really nice opportunity for me to kind of get eyes on the area and see what's going on, see if there have been some changes.
Okay. Yeah, as a ranch owner, I'm looking at the waters above me and what's going to affect me when it gets to me because of the fact that you guys are going to change it to different values for your studies.
Yeah, are you asking what would happen if one of these streams became listed?
Well, that'd be nice to know.
Yeah, well, after we go out and we sample this summer and we get some of this updated information, it takes us about 8 months or so to get back our macro invertebrate data. We use eco-analysts as a contractor, but I would be happy to revisit with this group and kind of update you on any information we find and collect this summer.
That would be appreciated.
I'll make sure I stay in touch.
thank you.
Emily, this is Wendy Green with Adams Soil and Water Conservation District. Two questions. First one is a two-parter. Do you need written permission from landowners? And if so, do you have a form for that? And secondly, you mentioned accepting external data, but you only mentioned from government agencies. So would you accept external data based on citizen science if this group put together a plan for doing sampling? Thank you.
Wendy, these are excellent questions. The answer to the first two is yes and yes. I do require written consent and I do have a form. So again, I'll put my email in the chat after this. And if anyone wants to follow up, get access to that form, just go ahead and let me know. And then as far as accepting external data, so I briefly referenced this, but we need data to be required tier 1. And so tier 1 data doesn't just have to come from an organized agency. It could be citizen science data. But to meet that tier 1 requirement, there's a few different conditions that need to be met. And I think we just tend to see those conditions met less when people are collecting that data on their own. But I can go ahead and kind of share what makes data tier 1. And I think that if anyone was looking to go out and collect some information, that could kind of help inform what your sampling plan might need to look like, what sort of QA, QC you may need to have in place for us to then use that information in our assessments. So hopefully that answered your question, Wendy, but it's different tiered data, and it just happens to be that some of these other agencies meet those requirements, and mainly that's having a sampling protocol, and then, like I said, quality assurance measures for the data.
Yes, that answered my questions. Thank you. And it sounds like maybe there's a possibility to train citizens scientists in the protocols, and then we could help gather data. Am I following you?
Yes,
We don't want to just go out there freelancing, in other words.
correct.
Nice. Well, Emily, thank you so much for your time and for being willing to come back to join the group.
Yeah, thank you for having me.